this presentation, and it's 8:59, so I'm just going to jump in because we have so much to talk about today. How's everybody doing this morning? Good, good. My name is Betsy Bleck, and I'm the director of the Oconomowoc Public Library. I'm here to talk to you today about diffusing tense situations and setting effective limits. So I know it doesn't sound like the most fun topic, but as we know, it is a really important topic. We're going to try and mix in a little fun along the way. We'll have time for questions at the very end. So thanks so much for coming. So first, a little bit of background. As I mentioned, I'm the director of the Oconomowoc Public Library. I'm a certified instructor from the Crisis Prevention Institute. The Crisis Prevention Institute trains people on how to maintain respect, service, and safety at work, but the tips we share today will come in handy at work and in our personal life. So what are we going to do today? We're going to cover a lot of ground in a very short period of time. We're going to recognize early warning signs of anger and hostility. We'll learn how to effectively use personal space, body language, and paraverbal communication to relieve tension and reduce hostility. We'll employ verbal intervention strategies to de-escalate situations before they become more disruptive or potentially dangerous. We'll maintain an objective and professional attitude when responding to an agitated individual. And then we'll learn just a little tiny bit about debriefing at the very end. Overall, our goal is to learn tips to let everybody stay safe, retain their dignity and pride, and feel respected. Okay, so the first big concept to talk about is the integrated experience model. Don't worry too much about remembering that name, just the concept. The integrated experience model is the idea that our attitudes and behaviors impact the attitudes and behaviors of others, and vice versa. So if we stay calm and cool in any situation, we can contribute to a better outcome than if we get angry or defensive. An individual's level of professionalism and authority is displayed through our behavior. This can be affected by precipitating factors and one's ability to rationally detach. So we're going to take a look at both of those concepts individually. Precipitating factors I like to describe with a soda can analogy, and this is an analogy that I learned from a couple of other Wisconsin librarians who are CPI instructors, including Jean Anderson, who's here in the room today. Imagine somebody handed you this delicious-looking cold can of Pepsi, and you thought, a cold can of Pepsi, and you popped it open. If they just handed it to you nicely out of the cooler, it's perfect. You're going to have a nice cold drink. But if they're kind of a stinker, or maybe a little mad at you, they're going to shake it up. Maybe they shook it up for a minute before they gave it to you, and when you open it up, it's going to explode all over you. Now, that can had the precipitating factor of being pretty agitated before you opened it. So that can came to you with a precipitating factor. And you can imagine this in a human being, right? The human being comes to you and you tell them that they have a library fine, but before they came in and heard that they have a library fine, they got a parking ticket, they stubbed their toe, maybe their child was sassy that morning. They have a ton of already built up agitation they're coming to you with. They have some precipitating factors. I do a brief video to show you. This is my favorite illustration of precipitating factors. It's a scene from Father of the Bride, starring Steve Martin as George Banks, the father of the bride. And this is Steve Martin coming to a situation with some precipitating factors.
I was escaping when I mind escaping to the market and picking up something for dinner. Sure, that was all I needed. A busy supermarket. I needed to drive, mellow out, get my mind off the wedding. But mellowing out was not in the cards. Yeah.
Excuse me, sir. I'll tell you what. I want to buy 8 hot dogs and 8 hot dog buns. But no one sells 8 hot dog buns. They only sell 12 hot dog buns. So I end up paying for 4 buns I don't need. So I am removing the superfluous buns.
I'm sorry, sir, but you can't pay for all 12 buns. They're not marked individually.
Yeah. You know what? Because some big shot over at the Wiener Company got together with some big shot over at the Bun Company and decided to rip off the American public because they think the American public is a bunch of trusting nitwits who'll pay for things they don't need. Well, they're not ripping off this nitwit anymore because I'm not paying for one more thing I don't need. George Banks people for a weed to calm down? That I don't know, sir. I'm just the assistant manager of the supermarket. But I'll tell you this, if you don't pipe down and pay for those buns, I'm going to call the police. Oh, right. Yeah, yeah, right. That's right. Hey, come here. Come here.
That was the low point. Flipping out over 4 hot dog buns.
So that's a little bit on precipitating factors, right? So George came to that situation stressed out about the budget for the wedding. You can see his tuxedo has split down the back. So he, has been reminded that he's aging and he's not fitting into his old clothes. And he's just had enough. So he takes it out on that store manager. Now thinking about the integrated experience model, did that store manager, do you think when he came in and said, if you don't calm down, I'm going to call the police, do you think that helped contribute to a positive outcome, or did that maybe add more fuel to George's fire? It added fuel to George's fire, yes. All right, so we'll talk a little bit more about that. There's lots of examples of precipitating factors. I mentioned a couple of them. You might be having something going on at home. You might not be feeling well. You might be tired. You might be experiencing the effects of drugs or alcohol. There's all kinds of things people bring to their interactions out in the world. Okay, so moving on from precipitating factors, we're going to talk a little bit about rational detachment. Rational detachment is the ability to control our own behavior and not take hostility personally. Easy, right? No, it's so hard not to take hostility personally. To avoid taking someone's negative response personally, avoid becoming defensive, and avoid accepting an invitation to a fight. Our goal is to retain respect and dignity for all parties. So we're going to remember again that integrated experience model. By controlling our own attitude and behaviors, we're contributing to a positive outcome. Some things to remember about rational detachment. Our intent is always to be part of the solution. Your intent is not actually to win. In this situation, you're trying to get to tension reduction. You're trying to get to the end of this problem. We can't control the behavior of another person, but we can control our own. And we can't control a situation without being in control of ourselves. So it's important that we explore positive outlets for any negative energy that we absorb in a tense interaction. So any examples here, what we like to do if you had sort of an unpleasant interaction with someone, how would you calm down from that?
Tell somebody else about it.
Yes, yeah, me too. Elka says, talk to somebody else about it. That's a really helpful thing and an important thing. You can debrief about it and maybe even learn something from the situation that will help you later on. Sometimes maybe you want to just go for a walk, take a nap. I'm a napper. So always look for a way to get rid of that negative energy that you've absorbed during any tense interaction. Now, we're going to get into the crisis development model. So the crisis development model is something you don't need to worry about remembering the name of. It's just a concept that as another person's responses change, become more agitated or less agitated, so should our response. So the goal for the responses at each level of the crisis development model, as I said, is tension reduction. Tension reduction is a decrease in the physical or emotional energy of either party. This occurs when a person calms down and regains control of their rationality, and we'll experience this as well. So we're going to break this down step by step. And there's our goal, tension reduction. So in the first step, when someone is acting anxious, just a little elevated where you can notice it, you're going to respond in a supportive way. So what are some ways people show that they're feeling a little anxious? Maybe they're starting to pace a little bit. Maybe they're drumming their fingers. Maybe they're staring at you. Maybe they're starting to wring their hands. So you're picking up some vibes that this person's getting anxious. So at this level, we're going to be supportive. We're going to offer an empathic, non-judgmental attempt to alleviate their anxiety. For example, you could just offer help. You could say, how may I help you? Just to learn a little bit more about the situation, because you don't know why they're anxious. You also don't know for sure if they are anxious. How may I help you? Or you could offer them a little space if you feel that will help the person to reduce their anxiety. So thinking back to that integrated experience model, we know that if we respond in a supportive way, empathic way, we're more likely to contribute to that person's anxiety reducing. At the next level, when someone's behavior gets a little more elevated, they're getting defensive. Here, the person is beginning to lose rationality a little bit. They're becoming non-compliant. For example, you might give a direction and they refuse to follow it. For example, a patron is yelling at staff about a fine and will not lower his voice. Or they might be starting to become belligerent and trying to intimidate. For example, a patron yells, "I'm going to call the library board president and the mayor and the paper about this. As a taxpayer, you don't answer to me." Everyone's favorite. "Oh, you're a taxpayer?" No, you know what I'm saying. So in this instance, our reaction must be directive. This is an approach we can use to manage an escalating situation through clear, rational direction. For example, you might just state the rule. "I'm happy to help you, but you need to lower your voice. If you don't lower your voice, you will need to leave." You're just saying, "I need you to lower your voice." And there you've set also a clear limit with a reasonable consequence that you can enforce. If you're able to lower your voice, I'll be able to help you. If you're not able to lower your voice, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Now, well, actually, we'll talk a little bit more in detail about setting those effective limits. The third level is when the person's become violent or is threatening to become violent. In this case, they've lost physical or emotional control and are posing an immediate danger to themselves or others. For example, hitting, grabbing, throwing objects. In this case, you're going to implement your library's emergency response procedures. Our emergency response procedures at my library would be ask the coworker to call the police and get everybody else out of the area. That's what we would do at my library. But it's important to know what the policies are at your own library for that. Your priorities here are to keep yourself safe. You can't help anybody else if you yourself are injured. So just like on the airplane, you put your own oxygen mask on first. You need to make sure that you yourself are safe in the situation. You also need to assess the situation. Look around at the room you're in and think like, okay, how many weapons are in this room? And a lot of things can become a weapon. This little harmless looking microphone could be a weapon if I threw it at somebody, right? This water, all kinds of things can become a weapon. So assess the situation and find what are the threats around you. And then, of course, you're going to summon assistance. So based on the seriousness of the situation, summon appropriate assistance. It could be security, it could be management staff, it could be law enforcement. But regardless of what assistance you're summoning, you need to be able to have them get there quickly and efficiently. And then fourth, make the environment as safe as possible. You're going to remove any onlookers, and that's because I think the more people in a situation, the more energy a situation has. So if you can just remove, and also just some people like an audience when they're really getting angry. So if you can remove some people from the situation, it's safer for them, and it might just take a little bit of fuel out of that person's fire. So also it's important to note that it might be appropriate to start your violence response procedures before a person becomes violent at all. And that can be appropriate if you feel like this person might become a danger to themselves or others, or if you feel threatened. And again, our goal is always to get to that tension reduction. So again, as I said, tension reduction is that decrease in physical or emotional energy. We are calmed down and we're regaining our control of our rationality and behavior. And again, we'll experience this as well. Can anybody think about a time when you have seen someone be upset and then get to tension reduction? What do you see happen to them physically after they've calmed down? Or what do you yourself feel personally once you've calmed down from a situation? Yes, like if they were really, then their body might just relax and calm down a little bit. Your shoulders come out of your ears, your heart rate slows down. Sometimes people just have a total breakdown. They might cry. That happens too. People have all kinds of different ways to responding to tension reduction. So let's go back to that integrated experience model briefly. Excuse me. So again, we are controlling what we put into the situation. We're presenting a calm, supportive, appropriate response and hoping that that's what we get out of the situation in return. So we often tend to think of communication as words, and words are certainly an important piece of communication, but there are many other elements involved. In fact, does anyone know how much of what we communicate actually comes out as words versus our nonverbals? How much of it is words percentage-wise. It's 7%. Only 7% of what you're saying comes out of your mouth. So it's really important to be aware of your verbals and your nonverbals. So we're going to start with part of nonverbal communication, which is personal space. Excuse me. Let's get the water here. Personal space is one of those hard things to define until somebody violates it with you, and then you're like, oh, that's what my personal space is. There's my bubble. There it is. So I'm going to just show you a brief, this is less than 2-minute video from Seinfeld, starring Judge Reinhold as the as the close talker. So here we go.
So, you don't have a problem with her, do you? Well, you threw her away. She wants to say hi. She's with her boyfriend. What's he like? He's nice. They're a close talker. Oh, right? You'll see.
This is Aaron.
Hello, Aaron. Hello, Aaron. I don't know any folks in town. We're going with a select charter group. I love France. I was just there last year. You know, I still have an envelope full of French francs. I'll give it to you.
You can't take money.
No, it's a gift from us.
Oh, that is so nice, Aaron. Isn't he nice? So listen, Jerry, I've been showing you a good time.
I haven't. You know, I have a friend who works at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. How'd you like a behind-the-scenes tour?
Really? You could do that?
Easily.
It wouldn't be any trouble?
Of course not. Right now. I'm ready.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Okay, let me get my coat.
So, hey, what do you say?
Well, I don't think so, Aaron. I have plans.
Oh. How about you, Jerry? Maybe I'll try and catch up with you. Oh, you must be Kramer. I've heard about you. You must be Aaron. I've heard about you. We'll see you later.
So Mr. Close Talker has a very small bubble. And what do you observe about the people in this video and the size of their personal bubble? For example, the older couple, how do they respond to his close talking? What was that?
Oh, they were a little more.
They were a little more, yeah, they weren't quite as freaked out about it, were they? So their bubble might be a little smaller. But then the close talker goes over by everybody else in the room, and they're clearly agitated, and unfortunately the close talker doesn't realize it. So everybody's personal space is a little different. It's generally about 1.5 to 3 feet away from you, and it can it can also change from one situation to another. For example, like over here, you two are sitting next to each other because you're at a conference, and there's 2 chairs that are right there. But there could be a situation where if you didn't know each other and you chose to stand next to your strangers, and this person stands right next to you, that would feel really weird and intrusive, and you'd be threatening, right? So personal space varies on the situation. Invasion of an individual's personal space may increase anxiety. So what happens to you when someone enters your personal space? Back up. Yep. And if you're a really committed close talker, they'll follow you, won't they? And then before you know it, you're over here. Yes. Sometimes people get really mad if people are in their personal space. It can feel like a threat, and that can make you feel angry. Yeah, there's all kinds of different ways people respond to an invasion of their personal space, but it doesn't alleviate anxiety, does it? It contributes to it. So for our own safety and comfort, we should maintain adequate personal space for ourselves. Factors that might influence our personal space include our past experience, the environment we're in, and the specific circumstances. And our personal space extends to our possessions as well. If you work in a library and you've ever had someone with a bag or something, or even sometimes people view the public computers as their own personal space, possessions can really become part of someone's bubble really quickly. Now, another part of nonverbal communication is, whoops, excuse me. Here, I gotta get my arrow here. Another part of nonverbal communication is body language. Like personal space, eye contact is a hard thing to define, like what's appropriate eye contact until someone falls outside of the range of what you feel is acceptable. So if someone is really not making eye contact with you at all, or if someone is insisting on staring exactly at both of your eyes and not blinking, then that also feels sort of odd. So other parts of nonverbal communication, we talk about body language, we're talking about facial expressions, gestures, and in this case, eye contact. So if we see someone we're talking to showing signs they're feeling anxious, what are some examples of some supportive body language we can show that might help relieve that person's anxiety and tension? What can we do with our own bodies to help contribute to their reaching tension reduction?
Not crossing our arms.
Yeah, we want to keep our posture sort of open. That's the classic example. If you cross your arms, that's presenting sort of a closed, maybe challenging posture. So you're going to stay with your arms open. Also, sometimes people are really aware where your hands are. If your hands are in your pockets, there's something they don't know about you. They don't know what's in your pocket. So if you have your hands visible, your open body language. And what about your face? It can be really easy to let our face show exactly what we're feeling. But we're going to try and keep a friendly, relaxed expression. So as I mentioned, our body language can escalate or de-escalate a situation. When we're in a situation, a face-to-face or challenge position is another way to really elevate someone's anxiety. So we're going to avoid doing that as well. It decreases the chance of diffusing a hostile or potentially violent person if you're right, face-to-face with them, shoulder to shoulder. So now we're going to learn a way to show supportive body language that also helps keep us safe when someone's tension is rising. And for this one, I need a brave helper. One brave helper, and it's really painless, I promise. Oh, thank you. Okay, great. Come on up. And what is your name?
Heidi.
Heidi, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Heidi, I want you to get really mad at me, or at least pretend. Okay, so you're facing me, and you're just really mad about something. Okay. Very good, very good. Okay, so now I'm going to approach you, and I'm going to get in your bubble. Is that okay? Okay, I'm not going to touch you. I'm just going to get in your bubble. So first of all, hold up your hand when I get in your bubble. When I reach the edge of your bubble, hold up your hands. Okay? And I'm going to approach you. We're going to make eye contact this whole time. It is actually not that painless. I broke trust with Heidi. That's what I'm talking about. So Heidi, I'm going to approach you, and we're going to be face to face like this. I'm going to stare right in your eyes. When I get in your bubble, go like this, okay?
Okay.
Okay. This is Heidi's bubble. Heidi, I'm going to step a little closer to you.
Okay.
Okay. So now, Heidi, I'm in your bubble, aren't I? How would you feel right now? I mean, right now, obviously, we're at a conference, and so it's not like we're in an actual interaction. But if you were really mad at me, is this a way, am I being supportive of you right now?
No.
No. Oh, goodness, no. Exactly. So also, right now, if Heidi were to get really mad and want to kick or punch, go for it. She got me. And she can also get me right in the guts, right in my vital organs here, right? So what I'm going to do is take a step back. So Heidi, try and punch me now. Things I didn't think I'd say there. You really go for it. You're going to get me. I'm just going to take a little bit of a step back. So now I'm also going to turn this way. Now, when you're really close, I'm going to come back in your bubble. If you're really close to someone, going like this, I can already feel, and I'm not mad at Heidi. Heidi's not mad at me, I don't think. And if I go like this, it's like I can feel it's like opening a door or a window. It's like all this tension is releasing. So you're gonna take a step back, you're out of the bubble, and you're going like this, and I'm keeping my body language open and my hands visible. That CPI calls that the supportive stance. And I would make you all act out, but there's not really space in this room. So let's give Heidi a big round of applause. Great. Okay, so we see that communication between two humans involves much more than words, and nonverbal behavior is present in most human interactions. So before we explore more about the power of words, our next section helps us explore a powerful communication dynamic between nonverbal communication and our use of words. And it's called paraverbal communication. Okay, so, Eric, if I were to come up to you and say, may I help you? What are you looking for? How do you feel about that?
that you're not very committed to what you're doing.
That's a really nice way. Eric says I don't seem very committed to it. It's very diplomatic, yes. I don't seem to have very much authority. I don't seem to care very much about what you actually might need or what you're waiting for. How about this? May I help you? What are you waiting for? How's that?
Now you're just ticked off and I'm wasting your time.
Right, yeah. He feels he feels that I feel that you're wasting my time. And what was the other thing he said? Then I'm ticked off, right. How about if I said, may I help you? Who are you waiting for? How's that?
Much friendlier.
Friendlier, right? Exactly. So our paraverbals, or the way we say what we say, really matter. Here's another example. Oops, excuse me. That's the CPI support us stance. I forgot to show you this slide. I just thought it was like that lady was really mad, that guy's really mad at her because she stole his yogurt out of the grapefruit fridge. And you know the grapefruit fridge. Yikes. But that supportive stance is important. It communicates respect, it's non-threatening, it promotes safety. Okay, anyway. Bette Midler is saying I am calm. Her paraverbals are telling a different story, aren't they? So our paraverbal behavior is how we say what we say. So as we discussed, only a small percentage of what we communicate comes out in our words. And two sentences containing identical words, as we just said, can convey very different meanings. There are three components of paraverbal communication. One is your tone. So when I came at Eric really condescendingly with my tone, that was not a supportive way to assist Eric. When I talked too loud to Eric, that was also not going to contribute to a positive outcome. So it can be too loud, it can be too quiet. You just want to use a respectful volume. And your cadence. If you're really coming out with a lot of words really fast, it can reveal that you're feeling anxiety or defensive. So keep your pace a normal pace. Keep it normal. So we spent a good deal of time and energy talking about human communication. And when we think about it, we haven't talked about our verbals very much yet. So we'll talk about that more now. The Crisis Prevention Institute looks at verbal interventions, or those things to say verbally to help reach tension reduction on a continuum. We're going to walk through the escalating levels of this continuum and what the most effective response is at each level. All right, so just to show where we are now. In the crisis development model, we are right here in this defensive level. So the person has gotten beyond anxious, they're getting a little bit defensive with you. You can tell that things are getting a little bit more heated. So we're going to look at what effective verbal responses can be to these defensive responses. Now remember, the behaviors noted don't necessarily occur in order, right? It's not as though an angry person is going to think, I'm going to step to this step. Now I'm going to get a little angrier and do this. People can jump all over depending on what the situation is. But when a behavior is recognized, the most appropriate intervention should be used to respond. So first, we have a little demo. So if I were to say to a patron, please let me, to a coworker, if I were to say, please let me know when you're done with the copier.
Why do you need the copier?
There's a plant in the audience. So Paula, could you please repeat that? I'm sorry.
Why do you need the copier?
Oh, I'm going to make some copies for the board meeting.
Who did I make you queen of the copier?
Okay, so Paula is feeling a little bit elevated, obviously. Something's going on with this situation. Well, what do I do now? Paula has responded in a questioning way. So questioning sometimes starts with information seeking. So when Paula said, why do you need a copier? But then it can escalate to, first let me back up a little bit. If someone asks you an information seeking question, just answer the question. Just assume good intent and give a rational response. But then when Paula had stepped it up a notch and said, who died and made you queen of the copier, I need to stay on topic. I need to avoid a power struggle. I need to respectfully decline an invitation to argue. So power struggles come in many forms and they're emotional landmines, and they can be motivated by many issues. It's easier to avoid being drawn into a power struggle if you can see it coming, right? So let's talk a little bit about power struggles. One common form of power struggle is defending your authority or credibility. For example, who are you to tell me I have to wear shoes in here? You could respond and say, I'm the circulation manager, but they don't actually want to know who you are. They're just trying to pick a fight with you. Don't accept the invitation. Another way someone might try to draw you into a power struggle is to push a button. For example, as a redhead, I'm sometimes accused of having a hot temper just because of my hair. So maybe a patron would see that and think, I wonder if she's a little bit sensitive about her hair. I'll say, oh, I'm in trouble. Uh-oh, I see you're a redhead. You're going to blow up at me with that fiery temper of yours. I'm not going to react to that personal button pushing. They're trying to pick a fight, and I'm not going to accept the invitation. Another thing would be if someone tries to distract you with an unrelated issue over here. Something like, why should I have to get to work on time when Sally can't even remember to Sally can't even remember to empty the outside book drop? Like, we're not talking about Sally here. Just ignore, do not accept that invitation to get onto a sidetrack issue. And another thing is issuing a power struggle is issuing consequences that you can't enforce. So for example, this one's for the parents and caregivers in the room. The temptation to say, if you don't pick up your room right now, I'm going to throw away all your toys. Like, no, you're not. You're not going to throw away all your toys. There's no way that you can enforce that consequence. If you're going to be issuing a consequence, it needs to be enforceable. So if someone tries to draw you into a power struggle, like Paula's character just did with me, we're going to try and not take it personally. We're rationally detaching. We are not going to take comments personally, and we're going to stick to the issue at hand. Again, the goal of all verbal intervention is to assist the individual in reaching tension reduction. Okay, so let's say the person's a little more elevated from questioning. They're refusing. Uh-oh. And you can't just move them like this poor guy. All right. Please lower your voice.
I am not going to lower my voice.
Please lower your voice so I can help you.
No, I want everyone to hear what I go through at this terrible library. I am not following your rules anymore.
What do I do now? Paula's refusing. Well, I have a couple of recommendations for what to do if someone refuses. Here's where we're going to set some effective limits. We're going to set a limit that is clear, simple, reasonable, and enforceable. So first, we're going to explain which behavior is inappropriate. For example, if you're talking to a patron and you just say, please stop that, they might not know if you're objecting to how loud they're talking or if the language they're using. So begin with a statement about a possible constructive result by choosing to comply. For example, I need you to lower your voice so that I can help you. That way they know about what might happen if they follow your directive, and you're being specific about what the issue is. And maybe you might explain why the behavior is inappropriate. Again, we can't assume the person knows why their behavior isn't acceptable. Is she disturbing others who are trying to talk on the phone nearby if it's an office situation? Is she being a little bit disrespectful? Or is he not doing a task that they've been assigned? So for example, you could say, when you speak loudly, it disturbs others. And you could give reasonable choices with consequences. And you can present those choices in a positive context. So instead of issuing an ultimatum, like that store manager did, like do this or else, you can tell the person what their choices are and what the consequences of those choices will be. Now, an ultimatum we want to avoid because that can lead to a power struggle and won't lead to a positive outcome. It's less likely to lead to a positive outcome. So if you provide choices with consequences, you're admitting that you can't force the person to make a certain decision, but you can sort of choose the consequence of what their choice is. So when you give some options, you're going to take the positive choice first and then the negative one. If you start with the negative thing, they won't hear the next part. So for example, if I were to say, for example, if you lower your voice, I'll be happy to answer your question. If you continue to shout, I'll have to ask you to come back another time for help. So I said, if you lower your voice, I'll be able to answer your question. You're telling them what they need to do to get what they want. They want an answer to a question. So if you lower your voice, I'll be happy to answer your question. If you continue to shout, I'll have to ask you to come back another time for help. Now you have to, this is the hard part, allow the person time to make a decision. If you don't allow time, then it very much just feels like an ultimatum in fancier clothes, right? You have to give them a little bit of time to consider what their options are. And remember, if they're upset, they might not be thinking or acting very clearly, so it might take a little extra time for them to think through and process what you've actually said. And then you have to allow for a few moments of silence. This is really, really hard, I think, too. This is something I struggle with. If someone is thinking through your only job is to stop talking and just let it be quiet for a second while they think. Avoid trying to fill any empty space with words. And then you have to follow through on any consequences you set. So limits are most effective when you follow through with those consequences, obviously. So for that reason, it's really important that our consequences are reasonable and enforceable. So in this example, if a person lowers their voice, offer to help them. If the person does not lower their voice, repeat their choices. And then if the problem persists, you can add an appropriate consequence. If you lower your voice, I'll be happy to answer your question. If you continue to shout, I'll ask you to leave and come back another time. So remember, even if you follow through with all of these steps, you'll not always gain compliance. But if you consistently follow through, you'll increase your likelihood of success. All right, level 3 gets us to, oops, that's level 4. Level 3, verbal release. All right, Paula. Now we're switching to a different scenario. Paula, could you please move your car from this loading area? Thank you.
Oh, sure. Another rule-following librarian type. Oh, I'd like to see you find a parking spot around here. Oh, wait, you're a librarian. You probably don't even drive a car. You probably rode here on your ironic banana seat bike with some annoying bell on it.
I'm going to avoid that invitation to a fight. Defend this awesome fight I clearly own. And I'll stick to the issue again. I need you to move your car so that our delivery van can access the building. I'm telling her what I need you to do and why.
Never! This place was terrible. I'm going to tell all of my Facebook friends how you bossed me around and yelled and were so rude.
I need to move your car so that our delivery van can access the building. I'm just going to repeat what I said because I'm pretty sure she didn't hear. Giving the benefit of the doubt. I need you to move your car so our delivery van can access the building. Now I'm allowing time for her to think about what she wants to do. She's thinking, but I'm going to say, if you move your car, because she hasn't moved her car yet, if you move your car, I will not have to notify parking enforcement. If you do not move your car, you might receive a ticket. I want you to avoid getting a ticket, so please move your car. Okay, so in that example, Paula's character tried to draw me into a fight. She tried to insult this cool bike, and I am avoiding that altogether. Now, I did allow her a little opportunity to vent, and that's okay. Sometimes people just need a little steam out, and they'll be okay. Sometimes people venting, I think, can ramp them up a little bit, so you kind of want to be careful with that. But you can allow a little bit of venting. And also, here again, you remove the audience. Sometimes people find more energy and encouragement if there's people watching. So remove an audience if possible. You're going to state a non-threatening directive. I need you to move your car, or I'll have to notify parking enforcement. You're going to be reasonable. That was a reasonable thing to request of Paula. Just move your car, please. Okay, if you're not going to move your car, you're going to have to notify parking enforcement. And then I'm going to be prepared to enforce any limits that I set. Again, our goal is tension reduction and for her to move her car. All right, so then the last level, we're not going to actually act this one out because it's such a bummer. But the next level is intimidation. So let's say Triple H is a library patron of yours, and he comes at you, and he looks at you that way. He's trying to intimidate you. And then let's say he issues a threat or says, you know, he appears to be ramping up to do you physical harm or to himself or others. In that situation, you're going to take any threat seriously. You're going to summon assistance to assess the risk. Avoid intervening alone. It's always good to go in there with help. And then you're going to follow your library's protocol for responding to threats. Again, in our case, it's just to call the police immediately. And then you're going to document the incident. There's a whole other session about documenting incidents, but we won't get into that very much. But it's important to document clearly in a detailed way that's based in observable facts that you see from the situation. Okay, so getting back to the verbal escalation continuum, that model can help us organize our thinking about the defensive level of crisis development. But however, as we know, our behavior escalation that we see can be much more random. So it's important for our staff, if we're going to succeed, that we're going to remember the integrated experience model and control what we are putting into the situation. And remember, we're seldom the cause of what's happening with this person. They're coming to you with precipitating factors. They're coming to you and they need to own what their response is. All you can do is control what you put into the situation. As long as you've responded in a respectful, safe way, you can feel good about doing what you could to contribute to a positive outcome. All right, now, when it's all over, oh, it's so tempting to say, whew, let's forget that ever happened. But you can't just forget it to happen. There's a really important part that comes next, and that's debriefing. So once we've reached tension reduction, and maybe we've taken some time to get our breathing back to normal, maybe the person has expressed remorse. As we were talking about before, people can have all kinds of reactions once they reach tension reduction. They might try and reestablish communication with you. They might start to cry. They might apologize. Sometimes they won't. People have all, again, humans are humans, and we all have different ways of showing when we really reach tension reduction. But once you do, it's very important to use that as an opportunity for growth or change so that incidents can maybe be prevented in the future. So if we're correctly trained in the process of debriefing, this could enhance future prevention efforts. If we debrief after a disruptive or violent incident, that is a really important step to do in order to get the most out of a negative situation. And it's really important not to skip it, as tempting as that is. All right, so now I'm gonna move on to our summary to tell you what we just talked about. As you know, we're just gonna run through a little bit of the concepts we learned. We learned about recognizing early warning signs of anger and hostility. We learned how to use personal space effectively. We learned about paraverbals and nonverbals. We learned about verbal intervention strategies to de-escalate situations before they become more disruptive and potentially dangerous. We learned about maintaining an objective and professional attitude when responding to an agitated person. And we learned a little bit about debriefing effectively. So that was a lot of information to absorb. Thank you for being such a super audience. This is my contact info. It's also on the handout that you have. If you didn't get a handout, the handout and all my slides and all the notes too will be on the WLA website. So I hope that'll be a helpful resource to you. And I think we might have just a few minutes for any questions, if anybody has any. Yes?
Do you have any suggestions? Do you have any suggestions when also looking at teams? Is there any other things that you've observed or different ways of handling some of the situations? Because they don't necessarily talk as much.
Right. Yes. That's a great question from Heidi. Heidi asked about doing this with teams. And I really think that a lot of the tools that we talked about can be used really effectively with teams. I think that integrated experience model works with anybody at any age, just trying to control what you're putting into the situation. Setting and enforcing limits is really important. So I don't have any special tips besides that, but I don't know if there's any team librarians in the room who might have some great tips to share as far as helping teams reach tension reduction. But if you do, this is Heidi and she'd love to talk to you. So I do think these strategies work really well. But like you said, sometimes if people aren't as verbal or as willing to share, or maybe aren't able to find the words as much, it might just take a little more patience and a little more empathy and a little more time to get to tension reduction. Jill.
How do some of these strategies shift or change if you are working with someone who maybe does not have the same type of verbal or nonverbal communication? Maybe someone with Asperger's or autism or something like that, right. Where maybe the eye contact things may be different.
Yes, that is a shift. Great question. So Jill's question was about using these strategies with someone who maybe has a condition like Asperger's, for example, where maybe the eye contact is a little different. And that's a great example of a precipitating factor that someone is coming into a situation with that you can't necessarily see, you don't know about it, and that person has no control over that, right? They have this thing that might make them behave in a situation differently. And so it's important to keep those precipitating factors in mind and respond appropriately. So I think that, again, the tools can be really helpful if you keep in mind the integrated experience model of controlling what you're putting into it. And in this case, what you're putting into it is an awareness that this person is coming to you with a different situation. Any questions? Yes.
A comment. I found it really effective to mirror what that other person is doing.
Great point, Michelle.
If they are really hesitant to make eye contact, then I'll reduce how much I give them.
Yes, that's great.
Facing people dead on can be very intimidating.
Yes.
I move to a 45 or even stand side by side.
Mm-hmm. Michelle says,
helps decrease
Yes, just for the people who are watching on the web, hello. And Michelle says that she finds mirroring can be really helpful. So if someone is showing you, and that's actually true for just about anybody, I think, kind of mirroring what their body language is. So if they're kind of showing a preference to sort of look out at something else while they're talking to you, you can mirror that. Absolutely. That's a great point, Michelle. Yes, Jean.
Do you have any suggestions for someone who uses crying as a defense mechanism? And this is the last question.
Great, okay. That was the last question. And the question was, do you have any tips for how to respond to someone who uses crying as a defense mechanism? And in my mind, I'm thinking like maybe that person knows that if they cry, then they don't have to deal with the actual issue at hand. I think in that situation, it could be helpful to give the person a little time to cry, but then like maybe a few minutes. You could even say, I can see you're upset right now. I'm going to leave the room and give you a couple minutes, and then we'll come back and talk some more. So you're staying in it. You're not backing out of it. You're going to get to tension reduction in a productive way that actually gets to the root of the issue. So it's really important. That's a great point to whoever asked that question, that crying can be a tool. It can be a tool that, and as can any other kind of emotional sort of outburst, you need to make sure and keep working through it if the person does that. All right, so I guess that was it for time. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, I'll be on.